In the summer of 1563, the plague made so many victims within the precincts of the tower, that I begged Cecil to intercede with the Queen for our removal from the infected fortress. Elizabeth at once consented, signing an order expressing her contentation that I should be sent to my uncle, Lord John Grey, at his seat at Pergo in Essex. My baby son and a goodly number of nurses and attendants went with me. Hertford was also removed from the tower, and sent, with our eldest child, Edward, to Hanworth, to the house of his mother, the old Duchess of Somerset. It broke my heart to say goodbye to little Edward. I had watched him grow every day of his life, unlike my mother or other royals who, as it was the custom of the period, entrusted their children to nurses and governesses. But I consoled myself with the thought he would be reunited with his father, who would take a good care of him. Sergeant Newdigate, who was now entrusted with the duty of conducting me to Pergo, was my husband's stepfather. He led the caravan which escorted me and my baby, with their attendants and baggage, from the tower, and on our arrival at Pergo, which was before the end of August, made himself very disagreeable both to me and to my Uncle John. The journey to Pergo, notwithstanding that it was performed in one of Elizabeth's own travelling coaches, a ponderous vehicle, that required 4 Flemish cart horses to drag it along the ill-kept roads, was very fatiguing for a woman in my delicate condition, and the sergeant's attitude drained me emotionally. Uncle had not been friendly to me before, but in my current circumstances still any port in the storm, and it was certainly better to go to Pergo with an unpleasant relation, than to stay in London with a chance of dying of the plague. Pergo, though a fine old mansion, dating far back into Edward III time, and surrounded by a moat, did not present many of the modern improvements. It was draughty, damp, and cold. My Lord John had lately made some alterations, but they were not very important. However, the gardens of Pergo were exceedingly fine, and the park was one of the grandest in Essex. For a while it brought some consolation to my soul to take morning walks with my beloved spaniel among the majestic trees with the colourful leaves painted with the autumn's brush. The prisoner's life at Pergo was tolerably peaceful and comfortable. Although my uncle continued to treat me quite coldly, nevertheless, before the end of August, the month in which I reached his house, he wrote to thank Cecil for obtaining this indulgence from the Queen for his niece. I myself also addressed a similar letter to Cecil dated the 3rd of September, but very soon after I was overcome by an attack of profound melancholy, and even the kindness of my aunt failed to cheer my drooping spirits. I was haunted by the thoughts of my sweet little boy and my beloved husband. It seemed so unfair to me that such simple pleasure like normal family life eluded me. Some people chased after power, influence, and riches, plotted intrigues, made others suffer, and were never punished for their deeds. I was just a fragile little woman who was being so cruelly punished for being a mother and a wife. And I didn't know when this torture would end, and if it ever would. The feelings of helplessness and despair so overwhelmed me, that the only thing I could do was crying day and night. All my uncle and aunt's attempts to make me eat were in vain. I felt I was losing power to live. My uncle and I wrote numerous letters to Cecil, Robert Dudley, and Elizabeth herself, pleading to redeem me of my great sorrow and misery. None of these letters were answered. In the middle of December, due to my stressful condition, I was bedridden for a few days, sitting still and weeping. My uncle became really worried and was thinking of sending for one of the Queen's doctors. He expressed his worries in another letter to Cecil, and on the next day he encouraged me to send yet another letter to the Queen, but it was in vain. Somewhere about Christmas 1563, my mother-in-law, the Duchess of Somerset, had gone to court, and had been received in very friendly fashion by Robert Dudley. For once in her life, she seems to have showed some feeling, and to have done her best for her unfortunate son and me, his persecuted wife. But she seems to have set to work the wrong way, as was her custom, insisting where she should have pleaded, and so made matters worse. On March 18, 1564, Hertford addressed a personal appeal to Dudley on behalf of himself and his wife, thanking him at the same time for his kindness to the Duchess. Dudley replied, within a few days, that he had done everything that speech and humble art could do, but saw no sign of any more favorable feeling towards us, the captives, on the Queen's part. A week later, Hertford wrote him another letter, enclosing a present of gloves for the Queen, which he beseeched him to present to Her Majesty. Dudley, in answer to Hertford's request that he should tell him if there was anything wrong with them, replied 2 days later that he had given the gloves to the Queen, and that there was no fault, except that they were too thin, a defect he had taken care to point out to the servant who brought the gloves from Hanworth. He added that it would be well if the next pair was make a little stronger. Evidently my Lord Hertford employed his leisure in manufacturing gloves, of which these were a specimen pair. But neither Cecil, nor Leicester, nor the Duchess of Somerset, who continued to intercede for her son and me, nor the gloves, sufficed to mollify the inflexible Elizabeth, who manifested no inclination whatever to grant her unfortunate prisoners what Hertford had termed the countershine comfort of our freedom. At this time my uncle John Grey, too, joined the chorus of appeals, addressing a letter to Cecil in March, in which he mentioned that he had not written for 3 months, and pointed out that we were in the season of Lent, which of all others hath been counted a time of mercy and forgiveness, and again begged the Queen's pardon for me and my husband.
In faith, I would I were the Queen's confessor this Lent, that I might enjoin her in penance to forgive and forget, or otherwise able to step into the pulpit to tell her Highness that God will not forgive her, unless she freely forgive all the world.
In the year 1564 I became once again the centre of the court intrigues without my being even aware of that. John Hales, clerk of the Hanaper, secretly published a pamphlet where he had taken upon him to discuss no small matter, but write to the Crown after the Queen's Majesty, having confuted and rejected the line of the Scottish Queen, and made the line of the Lady Frances, my mother, the only next and lawful. This, the most open declaration in favour of my claim that had yet appeared, naturally incensed Elizabeth, all the more so as it eventually transpired that Secretary Cecil had had a share in the preparation of the pamphlet, though all the blame, when the Queen learnt of it later on, was laid upon Hales, who, to add to his offence, had called in foreign lawyers to prove the legality of Hertford's marriage to me. Hales was sent to the Fleet prison for 6 months, whilst Cecil stated that he was not free from the Queen's suspicions. No doubt Elizabeth's resentment against the authors or suspected authors of this attempt to favour me was fanned by Lord Robert Dudley, who took advantage of this opportunity to strike a nasty blow at his archenemy Cecil, whom he accused of being the author of the offensive pamphlet. The Spanish ambassador wrote to King Philip of Spain about the matter.
A great friend of Lord Robert Dudley has been to visit me on his behalf, and has informed me of the great enmity that exists between Cecil and Robert even before this book, namely Hales's pamphlet, was published, but now very much more. The Queen is extremely angry about the book, although she signifies that there are so many accomplices in the offence that they must overlook it, and has begun to slacken in the matter. This person has asked me from Robert with great secrecy to take an opportunity in speaking to the Queen to urge her not to fail in adopting strong measures in this business, as if Cecil were out of the way, the affairs of your Majesty would be more favourably dealt with and religious questions as well, because this Cecil and his friends are those who persecute the Catholics and dislike your Majesty, whereas the other man, Lord Robert, is looked upon as faithful. If the Queen would disgrace Cecil, it would be a great good to them, and this man tried to persuade me to make use of Robert. With regard to this particular business of the pamphlet also, I would be glad to do as Robert desired. I have advice reaching me from all sides and particularly from Catholics, that this punishment, namely the disgrace of Cecil, should be pressed upon the Queen.
However, these sinister schemes did not come to anything, since Cecil did not receive so much as a reprimand, but, as already stated, he was well aware that he had aroused Her Majesty's suspicions of him, and doubtless, with his characteristic acuteness, took good care to do nothing that might compromise him further. My uncle John Grey was not so fortunate. He received a warning, and was kept under arrest at Pergo until his death. The thing was that, apart from the abortive Spanish plot for my abduction, another conspiracy was on foot to place me on the throne, and my uncle was cognizant of this scheme. Really, our family's motto might well have been, "Save me from my friends," For our worst enemies were our most eager supporters. My sister Jane's execution was the immediate result of our father's insurrection, and Hales's attempt to vindicate my honor only served to increase Elizabeth's anger against me and those around me. The loss of the Queen's favor had a depressing effect on the health of my Uncle John. On May 20, 1564, in his last letter to Cecil, he said that he would no longer endure the strain of anxiety caused by the care of me, adding that he had been very ill and feared he may not live much longer. Uncle died at Pergo on November 21st. His friends reported that he had died of thought, but his gout was sufficient to have ended his life. By thought, they no doubt meant worry.